I'm Jill Barshay at the Hechinger Report. Recently, I completed an hour-long documentary, a radio documentary, about one use of artificial intelligence in education, and it's how universities are tracking student data, mining millions of pieces of student data, sometimes every student ID card swipe, every click on a computer, how quickly they respond to a professor's email, all in an effort to boost graduation rates. Um, I I was thinking about the hype over AI. Just last week, I was at the Bank of Canada, BMO. What is that? The Bank of Canada of Montreal. They have the biggest ed tech conference for investors, venture capitalists, private equity investors every year. It's called the Back to School Conference here in Manhattan, and it took place last week at the Hyatt by Grand Central Station. Every single session was asking companies how we're using artificial intelligence in education. And I just got, since I knew I was going to do this, I just got a smattering of different ideas that are actually in the marketplace right now, some of them. NWEA, the biggest maker of interim assessments, it has an assessment where kids read to the screen and the AI assesses their reading level. It's sort of a gamified environment, and the kids don't realize they're being tested. The University of Phoenix, a for profit university, has anti plagiarism technology. There's ID verification for online learning, making sure it's not a fraudulent student sitting in front of the computer screen doing the lessons. There's AI powered auto grading at the University of Phoenix, and they're also using it for coaching and feedback. And that's good enough right now. We've got a panel, and time is running short. Thank you for your talk. We're going to bring you into the discussion after I introduce the panelists. I'll start to my left here. What's great about this panel is we have three experts that are already using AI in education, but they're using them in three different ways. One is in the corporate sector, working with companies on developing products. Another one is how AI can be used in education research. And the third is actually developing something that students are using, but it's to understand and create AI themselves. So the first is Margaret Price. You're the principal design strategist at Microsoft. Explain to the audience how you are using AI in education.
Hello. So I'll take a step back. I was hired at Microsoft 5 years ago and worked on a small team dedicated toward radically changing the way that Microsoft makes products and creating and scaling a practice called inclusive design, which is our approach to design thinking, a participatory method that creates equitable solutions for the widest number of people. And in answer to this really big question, which is how do you embrace each facet of human diversity to create for each individual and at the same time, the 7 billion people on the planet? So, as an approach, it's quite mindful about the varied contexts, capabilities, motivations of the individuals that we strive to create for, and at the same time, understanding the bias and the assumptions that we might make along the way. So today, I'm taking this approach as a lens and applying it to study the future of work within the Visual Studio Code product team, looking at the gaps that exist with the skills that are being taught today and what are needed for the jobs of tomorrow. Asking really big questions about what needs to be taught. We're talking a lot here today about AI, but a little bit more downstream, looking at computational thinking and literacy, how it needs to be taught, and the role of technology in classrooms, ultimately to enable student success. And what we mean by that is to be digital citizens, creators, collaborators, and competitors to thrive in the digital economy in safe and ethical and responsible ways. And to do that practically, we look at co creation, bringing diverse groups of people, students, educators, teachers, governments, policymakers together, going through inclusive design methods to help form hypotheses about problems and create solutions together, knowing that this is not about novelty or technology for technology's sake, but rather truly helping to drive student outcomes. And the second way is helping us all understand how to learn. and how to unlearn as we think about capability building for students, but also for all of us, every single person in this room, as we think about how we can advance our own lifelong learning. So ultimately, the goal is equitable solutions that can truly help drive positive outcome.
Get on microphone. Sandra Okita is a professor here at Teachers College where she teaches robotics. Tell us how you think about using AI in education, particularly in the research sphere.
Hello. Thank you. When you think about AI, I see it in terms of like pedagogical agents, avatars, and robots. And so my interest is to create an ideal peer learner for um, individual learning or pedagogical agents that could help collaboration between two humans, or a system that could kind of monitor a student and then provide information to the instructor. Now, a lot of work has been done on individual learning and using artificial intelligence or pedagogical agents for it. But the biggest challenge, as the keynote had mentioned, is that an agent to be able to detect conversation between two people and then know when to intervene, or things such as how does the automated system take into account the intervention that the teacher has done? And so all these things make it a little bit more harder. And I think research has been very successful in the area of machine learning. But I want to, for intelligent tutoring systems, but I also want to think more about human learning. So machine learning is great, but also human learning, meaning that the system doesn't have to be intelligent to help human learning. And so, in that sense, I feel like we could always piggyback on human intelligence. How can we use these tools as a way to enhance human performance, learning, and behavior? And so that's my area. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefania Druga, she was at MIT Media Lab and she developed a Cognimates, which she's going to tell us about quickly. She's just starting a PhD program in Seattle, Washington, right? And tell us about your work. It's an unusual take on how to use AI in education.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Stefania. I come from Romania, and I've been working on teaching AI to kids and with kids for the past 3 years. So this platform, Cognimates, which is free and open source, was co-designed with kids in the past 3 years. And if you're curious after the keynote you heard today and all the conversations to actually learn more about AI by creating your own AI, you can go and try it out. It's cognimates.me. And what I learned in the past 3 years, I started in 2016. We did a lot of studies. In 2016, I got really intrigued because Mattel, which is one of the largest toy manufacturing, was planning to launch Aristotle, which was Alexa for kids, and 15,000 parents signed a petition against it. They were, very, very much disturbed by the idea that a company could collect so much data about their kids from the nursery. A few months later, so Mattel had to pull back the product. A few months later, Amazon launched Alexa for Kids, which is basically just Alexa with a colorful case and has like an app market. We know that right now we're not only talking about digital natives, we're talking about AI natives. We know that this generation of kids that are growing up with home assistants, there are more than 47 million homes in US who have some sort of home assistant. This generation, this AI generation, are going to need to learn some skills of AI literacy. I'm not imagining that all the kids need to learn how to code, need to learn how to train their AIs, but because this technology is everywhere, it's ubiquitous, there's some form of literacy that is needed for these kids, these young people, and their families. So what we found in our longitudinal studies, we had six weeks where we went to schools, public schools, private schools, community centers. We even did workshops in churches. So all sorts of social economical backgrounds, and also doing this work internationally in lots of different cultures and places where people speak different languages. What we found is that kids' perception of AI changes significantly. In the beginning, kids would say, Alexa is smarter than I am. I can trust it, is friendly, or Google Home or a robot. And once they learn how to train it, how to build a classifier with their pictures of cats and dogs or whatever it is that they want to teach it, and once they learn how to make a game for it, their perception goes from it's smarter than me to it's not smart significantly. So we see that kids become not only more critical of these technologies, but also more fluent, and they get the agency. All of a sudden, the language changes. And I actually propose that we should change the term artificial intelligence because there's nothing artificial about it. It should be extended intelligence. So basically, that's what we're trying to do with Cognimates, and that's what I'm going to continue to develop during my PhD. Thanks.
Thank you. I think sometimes this discussion about AI and education gets a bit amorphous and abstract. And so I just wanted to start with a question for each panelist here about some concrete examples of AI in the classroom. Like, what are we talking about? And this is a question I'll just ask each one of you quickly for your understanding and maybe one concrete example.
Sure. So I'll give a Microsoft example that I personally don't work on, but a number of dedicated teams do, called Presentation Translator, which is a plugin for Microsoft PowerPoint that leverages speech recognition and machine translation to have subtitles. So if you are a teacher in a classroom talking with a group of students, the students are able to hear and read in their native language. And so what this does is a number of things. One is that it promotes literacy. We know that captioning has been proven to increase the rate at which students are able to learn how to read and write. When you think about ESL, students for whom English is a second language, or teachers who are teaching students who have multiple languages in a classroom, it can help break down language and even cultural barriers. If you think about students communicating to each other in entirely different countries, we know and have seen the applications of this for deaf and hard of hearing communities. So a deaf student can be sitting in a classroom reading as the teacher is speaking on their smartphone or on a display. And we can also look at, students who are homesick who want to follow along on a presentation, and you're able to do that remote as well.
Sandra, what have you seen?
I think it changes based on who the target learner is. So, for example, if it's an individual learner, I think AI system might be monitoring the way they perform and then keeping track of certain errors. And you might also use a much more larger database to see if the way that other kids solve a problem can be applied to that student. But if it's more with dyads and triads, then I think artificial intelligence is moving more towards the conversation that's going on between the two students during problem solving and taking that conversation, transcribing it, and then creating patterns, and then putting it as gathering data on it that in turn, over time, they might be able to detect whether a particular group is succeeding or failing. And the third area is the other, like the example you mentioned about seeing whether how a student is performing, gathering that data, and then providing that information to the instructor or teacher to see that they might be on the verge of a failure or they might drop out. So those are the three separate areas that I have seen in the classroom.
In my coverage of education research, I've seen a lot of researchers using very clever recorders on toddlers, and they're just recording hours and hours and hours of conversation between parents and caregivers and kids, and dissecting more. It's not just the 30 million word gap, but exactly how parents are talking and what these socioeconomic differences are creating. Stefania.
Yeah, I wanted to give some examples of data that kids like to create and collect. And going back to the keynote we heard before and how important data is for machine learning systems, it made me wonder what happens with the data that we don't have, and how do we get this kind of lens to only focus on things that we can represent mathematically or represent because we can collect data about them. So some of the projects that I've seen students do that I really like to share are things that I never expected, actually. So one of the first project that students did was to make a chatbot that was giving backhanded compliments. I didn't know what those are. So backhanded compliment is when someone says something nice, but it's actually not nice, like your shoes look so good for being cheap. So they actually, so, so I love this example because very much in the media and in the products that we use, we see this kind of black and white debate about AI is good for you or is bad for you, or it does the prediction correctly or it doesn't. But we lose all these nuances. So for me, it was very telling that a 10-year-old wanted to teach a robot how to be sassy with, how to have this kind of cheeky conversation, and what kind of examples they use. So that was great. They love teaching games, like making all sorts of games, of course, rock, paper, scissors, but many other types of games. We integrate also with IoT, so I like more artistic projects because not everyone is into games or into geeky things. So we had an entire room where the lights and there was a bubble machine and a strobe would react to how kids were describing their dreams. And it was like Alice in Wonderland. So if their dreams were nice dreams, the bubble machine would start and the lights were pink. And if it was a nightmare, then it was like a scary music and shadows will start on the walls. So there are all sorts of projects like that that kids are creating. And for me, the success of AI in the classroom, or a tool for AI in the classroom, comes from the diversity of projects that kids will create. And I think that's very important.
Hud, you have seen a lot of artificial intelligence. Have you come across interesting applications in education, or what do you think the future is in this field?
I think the application I see having the most impact is maybe the most mundane, but increasingly I see students who come in and they know so much just by watching YouTube, by this relentless barrage of information, and this idea that people, almost this democratization of education, this idea that people on the other side of the planet have a passion for, I don't know, a specific kind of ant. Okay, and they create this series of educational videos about this ant, and suddenly everybody around the planet knows about this idea that people have passion to teach, and that and it used to be that you had to go to college to be a teacher. You had to go through all these hoops to become a teacher, but now you just need a camera and you can teach the world about whatever you care about. And I see this incredibly powerful thing happening, and in a way it's going to take away my job, right? But in the other way, on the other hand, it allows everybody access to this incredible wealth of information. And to me, it's a mundane thing, but
I don't what's the AI angle there?
It's the fact that this thing that you can create all this content, that you can translate it, that you can deliver it. The fact that it delivers everywhere is all AI behind the scenes. The fact that it knows what you're interested in and it shows you the next thing, it engages you. All these things behind the scene, again, you don't see it. It's not a robot that says hello, but behind the scenes, it is all AI making that possible, and it's so powerful.
Margaret, we talked ahead of time about some of your concerns with artificial intelligence. Can you tell the audience about an application that happened in China that was actually mentioned in the previous panel, but they didn't actually explain what happened? And so can you explain what happened in China in this school system and what the debate was?
Well, there's a number of things that are happening in a number of big debates. I think the one that they mentioned on the first panel was facial recognition, which can be tricky because when you think about layers of privacy and consent and collecting data and what it looks like and means. And so we're really strong advocates of full transparency and trying to understand the application and how it can really benefit students. And rather than trying to get students to the same standardized place, learning what students want to learn, what motivates them, and how they can customize their own learning experience. And so the facial recognition, I think that's the example that you were referencing.
Well, you mentioned something on the phone that there was something happened in China and there was a big debate about it.
Oh, squirrel,
Yes,
I believe is
tell us that story.
So tutoring, when we think about AI and the benefit for tutoring and creating experiences where you can assess somebody's standard level and create custom material and curriculum for them, which people have different opinions about in thinking about kind of adaptive versus personalized learning.
And what was the controversy?
Well, there's a difference between kind of adaptive learning and, as I just mentioned, thinking about creating individualized pathways for people to get to the same standardized place rather than personalized learning, or helping to create individual paths based on where students really want to go and understanding what they're motivated by, what they want to learn, the pace at which they need to learn, and being really deeply thinking about student learning outcomes as a result. And so there's a number of people who believe different kind of sides of that coin, and I'm sure the other panelists probably know about and have opinions about this as well.
I feel like one thing that's interesting about this is if it's within the Squirrel AI environment and in their centers, I think it's fine, right? But if it goes goes into schools, then there's an additional challenge, right? I think there's something that we talked about earlier in the earlier panel of teachers not being ready for such tools. Well, if I could take a different approach, I feel like I would like the people that create these tools to do more. And what I mean by that is they create great tools, but they don't take it a step further, meaning they don't talk of how and why something is working, or they may not kind of identify the learning trajectories. They may not incorporate certain tools that are familiar for teachers. So it's not just that the AI is the tool. The teachers come with skills and tools of their own, right? Being trained as a teacher. So if they could recognize some of the skills or learning theories behind that device, then maybe we don't need to train them that much, right? If you open the box and they see it and say, oh, that's linked to like learning by teaching, or like, all these collaborative learning methodologies and learning theories that will allow them to use it in a way that they are most comfortable for. So I do ask that that's one challenge in the classroom, to kind of, if the developers can meet halfway and include researchers to help you create that path of learning trajectories and stuff like that, that would make it more applicable.
Stefania, what do you see as the role of the teacher as we bring AI-enabled technologies into the classroom?
I was going to reply to the previous one
Go
as
ahead,
well.
please do that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually taught in China this summer, so I got to work with students and teach prototyping with AI, creative learning with AI, with teenagers, with graduate students, and also meet with teachers. And I think there's clearly a difference in generations in terms of approach to creative learning, but also in terms of approach to questions around privacy. And that was very, very good for me to discover and have those conversations. And I met people from the Squirrel AI team, and I think the main challenge with personalized learning, and whenever, like when I started working in 2016 on AI education, everyone thought that the approach was to use AI to educate kids, not the other way around. And I think the reason for me it's so important that we have a constructive approach, and I'm a Seymour Papert Fellow, disclosure, so I'm very biased, but I really think when you were presenting earlier all of this example of how Kasparov lost chess, right? Or how we are also like that. Our cloud is collective intelligence. And if we think of training the next generation, that we are capable of imagining all the scenarios in which they should be trained, or in which they learn, or in which they can be improved, we are really like tricking ourselves. So I don't see another option other than providing people with the tools to generate and create and learn by doing and connecting them, because our cloud and our AI is this collective intelligence that we're really good at, evolutionary speaking. And what I saw in my research, the number one, because we had video recordings, we tracked everything kids said and did for 6 weeks. The number one factor that led to them understanding AI concepts better and changing their opinion to questions was not how much time they spent coding, how much prior experience they had, was how much they talked to their peers and the conversations they had with their peers. So for me, I very much agree with Sandra here. I think sometimes we need more silly instead of smart technologies that put the focus on the people and allow people to do what they do best. So yeah, in terms of the role of the teacher in the classroom, I think the number one, my mom is a teacher. She's been teaching for 30 years in a small school in Romania. Every time I go, I need to explain to her what I do. I think the biggest challenge for teachers is not to be afraid and to understand that their role will shift, and be okay to learn from young people. I think the climate change is a great example. I was going to use that, but I think kids will teach us, and as teachers, like, we need to be open to learn with them, and we need to learn how to become more mentors than beholders of knowledge that we impart.
But how do you see this debate about using some kind of intelligence to guide students on a learning path? Like, should it be used so that students can go deeply into their interests, or that they all go to some all meet the same standards and give whatever supports they need to hit the same standards?
No, I definitely, we did a project a while ago on trying to, what I understand is now controversial, but I didn't think it was, on trying to basically create sort of personalized curriculum paths for students so that they can go from where they are. The idea was that you give them the AI a paper or some concept you want to understand, and it teaches you all you need to know to get to understand that goal. So it's sort of goal directed education. So I definitely believe there's opportunity to diversify what we teach through AI, to access all kinds of information in clever ways. But the bigger thing that I think on echo what people are saying here is that I think when it comes to knowledge, there AI is very good at transmitting knowledge, letting you find knowledge, but it's the softer skill, the communication, the social stuff that is very difficult for AI. We're nowhere close to solving that or imitating that, and that's what humans are great at. So I think I would sort of keep focusing on that area rather than trying to teach knowledge, because that part is kind of being automated.
Sandra, you are very interested in student to student interaction and teacher student interaction. Why do you need AI and robots to study that?
So rather than teacher-student interaction, I'm more interested in peer interaction. I think there's a lot of characteristics that are very common between a peer learner and technology. Technology is not stable. They don't have all the answers. It's imperfect. And that I think that's similar to a peer, right? So having a not so sophisticated tool could actually provide learning opportunities, possibly both for the student and the system, right? And so we're thinking that maybe instead of having a teacher agent or something, I feel a peer type of relationship and an incomplete system could be helpful.
And what have you learned? I mean, can you give us an insight that shows the benefit of having these AI robots interacting with kids?
So I think it's just so computers, I'm sorry, agents, avatars, robots are just a platform, right? It's a tool or it's an object. I think the key is what kind of learning relationship you design with it. And it's not the design of the object or the interface, but the type of relationship. And that, I think, is where learning methodologies come in that are known to work well. And so we use that as a way to kind of deliver that interaction to kind of role play or scripting, or these things are known to help, like dialogical instruction is known to help learning. So applying that would actually help. So I'm not really quite sure. I think the intelligence side, artificial intelligence side, will be in the background of maybe keeping monitoring, collecting data, but it's kind of one functional unit within a system. But then outside, using these familiar methodologies and learning theories could actually help deliver a better, meaningful interaction. And be familiar with the teacher. So it may not be the most sophisticated system.
Margaret, you are very interested in making sure that we are inclusive as we introduce AI into the classroom. Can you explain to the audience your concerns and what developers need to be sure of as they're developing these technologies?
Sure. So I think some of this was mentioned briefly in the first panel, particularly when you have like homogenous teams, because we all tend to design things as practitioners based on our own attributes. So, as an example, I am a right handed person, and if I were developing a particular piece of equipment, I might develop that with a particular bias so that people who were left handed might not be able to use that thing because I come with a set of attributes. And therefore, the things I create might have all of those attributes and exclude absolutely everybody else who doesn't share those same attributes, whether that be English as a first language, right handed, etc. I could go on. And so, designing for inclusion often begins by recognizing and identifying who might be excluded. And so, the most important parts to help identify those things are having a really diverse team of people, bringing your end user, the student in this scenario, based on this conference today, the professor, the teacher, the educator, all in the room together to work to understand what are some of these biases, what are some of these assumptions. And history would tell us there are a number of disasters and really dangerous implications of not designing for inclusion. And there are, in fact, many economic benefits of designing for inclusion as well.
Can you just make a quick example of the disaster?
Sure. So the Air Force, this is an example, designed the first flight deck using the averages of about 2,000 people. So they took the average dimensions, think about height, weight, distance between your eyes, etc. And they took all of those things and averaged them right in the middle to create kind of the average pilot. You can assume, based on where the story is going, that those average numbers were everybody, but also nobody at all. And at that time, that was the insight that led them to understand why there were so many airplanes that were crashing that they could not attribute to pilot or mechanical error. And it was because of an artificial average. That insight led to innovations that we all use today, like adjustable components for the devices that we wear. And so artificial averages and the words of normalcy are, in fact, erroneous. And we do this all of the time when we create technology. We create these false uh, personas. And I personally don't believe in personas. We have a different model of thinking about how to understand the motivations of humans and take into consideration the varied context and capabilities. So, the Air Force example, which is actually from Todd Rose's book, The End of Average, I think is a great one.
What do we know about the efficacy of AI enabled technologies in the classroom? Do we know if any of it works? I mean, you're as a professor here. Is there much good research on whether any of this is actually boosting student learning?
I think right now there's a lot of trying to come up with the data that could, like the intelligent tutoring system in CMU has a lot of data, right? But aside from that, there's when it comes to figuring out more of a behavioral part, emotional part, social interactions involved, then it hasn't really been explored as much. So some of these agents might be very implicit social type of interactions. But I feel like using that social aspects of technology can actually drive more of the conversation, more of the engagement. And so I feel like that area should be emphasized more. Just an example of one of the things that was interesting is we had children write out math problems and keeping that as data. And then afterwards, every time the child kind of writes out the math problem in a not so neat way, then it responds. But we found out that it's really hard to self correct. I mean, children are good at recognizing other people's mistakes, but not their own. So that's the part where we're trying to figure out.
Not just children.
Yeah, I know. Not just children. So we're trying to figure out how can we actually detect and prompt them to recognize their own mistake. That's the part I don't have an answer yet, but something that I would definitely like to pursue more with AI to see how can we intervene and make them recognize.
What about checking your work after you do it?
So they say they checked it, but they don't like to check that much. And so one example that we did is, but they like to point out other kids' mistakes. And so we try to think, can we train them to monitor other kids? And in turn, would that behavior turn inwards? And as a result, yes, it did. So those that were trained to monitor self and other were able to self-correct. Now, whether that correction was right or not, we're still working on it, but they do attempt to self-correct. There is some self-correction that's successful. Yeah.
Stefania, what insights do you have as to whether your more creative approach of teaching kids how to train their own AI agent? I mean, is that the right way to, like, they're training their own AI agents to do rock, paper, scissors in different games? To what extent do you see that kids are getting educational benefits from that?
That's a great question. Thanks. I think there are multiple benefits. The first, number one benefit that we saw and we were surprised is the level of engagement that kids had with this technology. The fact that they could spend hours, we would go to schools 2 or 3 times per week. They would spend 2.5 hours in a session focused and wanting to collect their data, train a game, test the game, talk with their friends, share what they build. So they were really engaged in this process. And for me, it was very important to do long-term studies because whenever we introduce a new technology, of course, kids are going to be enthusiastic about it, but we wanted to see how that changes over time. And we monitored specifically if they understood concepts of machine learning and AI. Do they understand how computer vision works? Do they understand how sentiment analysis works? What level of vocabulary they develop over time, and how often do they use specific concepts and terms? So all of that was documented, and I really think that this project-based approach worked well. And the other part that worked well is not only that they train their AI, but that they build applications. Initially, when we went to schools and talked to kids about self-driving cars, they didn't care. For them, driving a car is fun. So they don't really want to talk about self-driving cars and the ethics of that. But if they can build a game that they love, and they can see, oh, I trained the game to only recognize people with my skin color, skin tone, and I want to play with my friend who has a different skin tone, then we start to have even deeper conversations. So it's not just the concepts of machine learning that they're learning, that they're discovering, but they're also discovering, oh, this is how I need to change my data set. I need to include other examples so I can play with my friend. All of this big ethics conversation become very concrete. And for them, it also becomes something that they can do something about. So it gives them that agency, which I think is very important.
So we're supposed to wrap up. How many minutes do I have now? 4. Okay. I want to end on 2 questions, but not everyone can answer it. Okay, so who has the most pungent opinion on the way that ed tech entrepreneurs are screwing up with AI education? Like the one thing that just drives you batty that should not be going into classrooms?
I can go on this.
Short, quick,
very short. It really drives me crazy. There's a numbers of social robotic companies that went bankrupt, and I think it's really problematic that these companies get launched. We introduce them into the classroom. and then they go bankrupt. So I really do not understand. For example, I was very disappointed with Anki and their approach. They got a lot of funding. They had a really good platform. And then in true Silicon Valley fashion, it went bankrupt. And we can talk more about that. But I think it's really problematic when we constantly add these technologies and say this is going to be the future of...
And then the plug gets pulled.
Right.
And my next question, I think we'll end on this, is maybe with just a couple words. What is the AI application you would love to see developed next in the classroom? Just like 2 or 3 words of what you would love to see.
Equity, access, and belongingness.
Sandra?
I think it would be nice for teachers to be able to use technology as is, out of the box.
I want it to be something that I can't imagine it. I want it to be like when we look now, like our parents and grandparents look at internet and how we use our phones. I want what our kids do with AI to be something like that, something that we don't imagine and we don't even like foresee what that would be.
And we'll end with the keynote speaker. What's your AI dream in education?
I would love to have your system, not for kids, but for everybody. I think teachers and everybody and people who study journalism and everybody should understand what AI is, because it is so fundamental to how we're going to live our lives. Not to learn how to code, but to understand and to be empowered to use it in interesting ways. And that's a big piece that's missing.